Evangelical Christians, mainly white evangelical Christians, have been so influential in politics throughout the past 40 or so years, even though they're a minority and their political beliefs are not always reflective of the majority opinion of most Americans. Evangelicalism, while not completely isolated to America, is uniquely popular in the United States and is not nearly as popular in Europe or elsewhere. About 25.4% of the U.S. population, according to a 2015 Pew Research poll, identify as evangelical. 56% identify themselves as Republicans, and an estimated 81% of white evangelical Protestant voters went to Trump this year. So let's start with some definitions. Christianity has many different branches, the two main being Catholicism and Protestantism.
Oh, Protestants like to march and Catholics like to walk.
Okay, can we just, Jenny, could you just, oh, you've already written it down, have you? Great, thank you, Jenny.
Protestantism basically covers everything that's not Catholic, which includes evangelicalism. Side note, technically there are evangelical Catholics, Mike Pence for one, but it's much less common, and evangelical Catholics are kind of a whole other thing. Evangelical Christians differ from other Protestants and Catholics in a few key aspects. One, evangelicalism is characterized in a firm belief in the literal truth of the Bible, meaning they believe the text in the Bible should be taken literally and that its meaning should remain unchanged. Two, the encouragement to others to be born again. And three, the emphasis on one's personal connection to Jesus Christ.
Talking about what God says. And if you want the kind of miracles that are in the Bible, you're going to have to do what God said to do.
One of the reasons evangelicalism is so appealing to so many Christians is that evangelical sermons tend to be a lot more energetic and fun to watch. Charismatic preachers and televangelism are key aspects of evangelical culture and customs. Look, I could probably write a whole video on the history of televangelists because that's a whole other can of worms, but I'll try and keep this part brief. Basically, for those who don't know, televangelists are preachers who televise their sermons to spread the word of God. This practice became huge in the 1980s, but their popularity fell after a series of scandals, evidence of fraud, and allegations of televangelists manipulating their audiences to give more money.
I really believe that if Jesus was physically on the earth today, he wouldn't be riding a donkey. Think about that for a minute. He'd be in an airplane preaching the gospel all over the world.
I'm upset with the moral majority, man. How can y'all sit there in your living rooms and say that it's too much sex, drugs, and violence on TV? It ain't enough.
Evangelical Christians actually weren't very politically active until the political organization, the Moral Majority, was founded by conservative televangelist Jerry Falwell in 1979. The Moral Majority was made as a response to the liberal movements of the 60s and 70s and was characterized by its opposition to abortion, the Equal Rights Amendment, gay rights, and pornography. The main crux of the Moral Majority was the theory that, despite liberalism and what they felt was moral decline in the 60s and 70s, there was actually a silent majority of people that were opposed to these changes and believed in traditional Christian values. The Moral Majority felt that America's decline in the 60s and 70s was due in part for a few reasons. A, the breakdown of the traditional family. B, feminism, which they felt encouraged women to leave their traditional roles. C, legalization of abortion. And D, the increasing secularization of American culture. This organization was hugely successful in the 1980s and was able to motivate large numbers of Christian conservatives, especially evangelicals, to vote and to write their politicians and raise money. The impact of this group carried on even after its dissolution in 1989. Evangelical conservatives remained a very loyal and active base for Republican ideas.
Many of our Christians have what I call the goo-goo syndrome. Good government. They want everybody to vote. I don't want everybody to vote. Elections are not won by a majority of people. They never have been from the beginning of our country, and they are not now. As a matter of fact, our leverage in the elections, quite candidly, goes up as the voting populace goes down.
Evangelical Christians' staunchly conservative stance on abortion, LGBTQ plus rights, religion, and feminism have impacted American policies for decades. Many politicians, especially Republicans, very actively try to win the evangelical voting bloc, or at the very least not aggravate them. Ronald Reagan was endorsed by the evangelical movement. In 1985, Ronald Reagan officially requested the Supreme Court to overturn their abortion ruling, but in 1986, the ruling was upheld. However, because the vote was so close, 5-4 voting to uphold it, evangelicals still felt that overturning it was in reach, and that's why they've continued to push to overturn it ever since. George W. Bush was born again himself and also received evangelical support.
You are here because you strongly support a constitutional amendment that defines marriage as a union of a man and a woman, and I am proud to stand with you.
In 2004, called for a constitutional amendment that would make gay marriage illegal. While gay marriage was not supported by a majority of the U.S. population in 2004, it was most opposed by white evangelicals by far, especially compared to other religious groups at the time. 61% of unaffiliated were in support of gay marriage, 36% of Catholics, 34% white mainland Protestants, and just 11% of white evangelicals were in support of it. This amendment was very clearly done to motivate evangelical Christians to vote for Bush in a very competitive election year, and it worked at rallying evangelical voters.
In spite of the many serious problems we've discussed, what's the United States Senate going to debate this week? A new energy policy? No. Will we debate the raging war in Iraq? No. Will we address our staggering national debt? No. Will we debate stem cell research? No. But what we will spend most of the week on is a constitutional amendment that will fail by a large margin.
I would like to thank the evangelical and religious community, because I'll tell you what, the support that they've given me has been so amazing and has had such a big reason for me being here tonight. True, so true.
Donald Trump has received quite a lot of support from conservative evangelical groups. He's been endorsed by some of the biggest names within the church. Evangelical church, I don't mean any other. And it's not really a surprise that evangelicals are so in support of him. He has championed himself as their protector, and all the way back in 2016, he said he'd appoint justices who'd vote to overturn the Roe v. Wade decision. And whoops, during his term, Trump got to appoint 2 Supreme Court judges, Brett Kavanaugh and Amy Coney Barrett. Let's be real, there's no way Trump would choose to nominate a pro-choice judge. Those are judges put there to overturn Roe v. Wade. Now, what the effects of these judges will mean for the future of America remains to be seen, but at the very least, restrictions on abortion are on the table. And speaking of recent stuff, Masterpiece Cake Shop v. the Colorado Civil Rights Commission. That was a case that saw a lot of attention. And to summarize, Christian baker Jack Phillips refused to make a wedding cake for a gay couple, arguing that it was against his religious beliefs. And there's a lot to unpack here, but I'd like to pick out how this case exemplifies a lot of modern arguments of evangelicals. Mainly how, unlike how they viewed themselves in the 1980s, they see themselves as a smaller, unpopular minority that requires the government to protect them and their religious liberties. And you can see this in how conservative politicians talk about religious persecution. Like here, Mike Pence.
This president, this administration have stood strong with persecuted religious minorities, particularly Christian persecuted minorities around the world. In Iraq, I'm particularly proud of the fact.
God, don't you love how he was so subtle about Christian persecution in that video? This fear of persecution, however realistic, has led to some fierce loyalty to Donald Trump, despite his many unchristian activities. A poll from the Pew Research Center found that 59% of white evangelicals said that the Trump administration has helped rather than hurt the interests of evangelical Christians. However, just 15% of white evangelicals say that the phrase morally upstanding describes Trump very well. 23% said honest was a good descriptor of him. Master P Cake Shop actually won, but I think that their win exemplifies another modern evangelical idea. Evangelicals win elections, but lose the culture. The silent moral majority is not really a phrase that you hear anymore, and it's not really a popular idea anymore either. And something that I didn't touch on are Black evangelical Christians. White and Black evangelical Christians have pretty stark differences in voting tendencies, especially in terms of the presidency. So for instance, a Lifeway research poll found that 73% of white evangelicals said that they were going to vote for Trump, whereas only 19% of Black evangelicals said that they would vote for Trump. So why did I just spend a bunch of time talking about evangelicals? For fun? No. Look, people should care about the role evangelicals play in American politics, because evangelicals have been effective at getting what they want in politics. Republicans have been winning a lot of elections over the past 10 years, and that's due in no small part to conservative evangelical groups. The white evangelical vote is one of the main deciders in many elections because they're very politically motivated. They've been showing up for the past 50 years, and that has its effects. Let's listen to the clip again.
I don't want everybody to vote. Elections are not won by a majority of people. They never have been from the beginning of our country, and they are not now. As a matter of fact, our leverage in the elections quite candidly goes up as the voting populace goes down.
So here's my call to action. Get involved. Let your representatives know who they're supposed to represent. Be specific. Bring up specific issues and bills.